Welcome, everyone. My name is Alice, and I am co-founder and director of Joyfully Different. If you are new here, if you do not know me and you do not know Joyfully Different, we are a non-profit organisation, and our mission is to help neurodivergent people build businesses and careers that feel sustainable, joyful, and fully their own, all without masking, burning out, or shrinking who they are. We do this through our membership community and programs for neurodivergent entrepreneurs, as well as our neuro inclusion training for organizations. In today's panel, we are joined by a wonderful panel of guests to explore the question, is it time to make unmasked business the norm and finally redefine this whole concept of professionalism? I think yes, and I think everyone's going to agree, but we'll get into that in a moment. So before we get started in the discussion, which you are all here for, I am going to go around each of our panelists and invite them to introduce themselves and answer a bit of an introductory question. So Dee, I'm going to come to you first. Please, can you introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and answer the question, how do you define masking and how has or does masking show up for you?
Hi, so thank you, Alice. I am Deanna Avis. You can call me Dee, and I'm a Mexican American immigrant to the UK. I've lived here since 2004, and I'm co-founder of Joyfully Different with Alice, and I'm also a psychotherapist and coach in private practice. Masking to me means when you are hiding your authentic self, which of course implies that there's degrees of masking. We all do that to an extent. So I think our conversation today will focus on the severity of the masking and the impact, how much um, that impacts you. Sorry, I'm trying to keep it brief, but I get excited. I have ADHD. And the way it shows up for me is in certain spaces where I feel threatened, then I feel that I have to put on a kind of certain persona, and the strain of that then leads to burnout and all kinds of not fun stuff.
Thanks, Dee. Atif, come to you next.
Hi all, lovely to be here. Nice to be in a space where we're not masking. Um, so how would I define it? I think it's to a certain extent, I think I mean, I suppose I speak as a person of color and a child of a migrant. So we're masking anyway to a certain degree, and you're always masking in some way because you're dealing with larger geopolitical realities of where you have agency and power and where you don't. And so that's outside of neurodiversity, but at the same time, it can't be separated from neurodiversity. So it's much like you can't have a mental health agenda. Sorry, you can't have a health agenda without a mental health agenda. So they are deeply interlinked. So then it's just a question of what part is doing you harm. So and we will all code, and I know there's phrases for it, code switching and things like that, but we have agency and power in some relationships in our lives and less so in others. We have transactional relationships in the workplace, hopefully really loving ones, but also at times transactional. So there's always going to be an element of masking. So I guess the question for me is whether I recognize when it's doing me harm. And I would say that I am a dyslexic guy with ADHD too. I never worked in a single company in my life where I told that to anybody. And so to be able to tell that to anybody, I had to create a company. And so I guess that's an ultimate example of how the depths to which masking can happen. I felt deeply unemployable. I get to do work around the world and advise the United Nations on neurodiversity, but I felt deeply unemployable because of masking, not because of realities or because of space, but because in order to unmask, are we wanted? And I suppose that's the big question that speaks to it. I'll sort of hold it there and say to everyone, we're all probably masking at some level or another, but just to hold into the spaces, what point is it doing harm and at what point do we recognize it? Back to you, Alice.
Thanks, Atif. And do you just want to say a sentence about calling all minds as well and what you do?
Oh yeah, sure. Happy to. I can. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So I'll put it in the chat as well. But there's Calling All Minds, or an organization working to address these intersectional realities for people. And we recognize that these aren't just intersectional conversations about who gets to participate and who doesn't, but they need tools and technologies and approaches to just make it an easier campaign for all of us.
Yeah.
That's enough for me.
Thanks, Atif. Cess, please do introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Cecilia, or Cess, or C, or whatever you fancy, as long as it's polite and kind. I run a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy that specializes in sort of cross-cultural communication, and I work in 3 languages: Italian, English, and French. I work with organizations of all shapes and sizes to really drive the idea that diversity benefits everybody, and that it's something that is joyful. Thank you, Alice. But also that is exciting. That diversity isn't something to be feared. That being diverse is enriching for everyone's experience. So that is what I do. I also do some ghostwriting for those people who are in positions who need to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but haven't got the time to. Yeah, I genuinely love what I do with every cell of my being, and I hate currently this world that we're living in, because it just feels like, and I'll come to what sort of masking is for me, but it just feels like we, are all being told to actually wear more masks, and not critically think and not have opinions and just conform. So what is it to me? So I'm going to go bold, and to me it's an attack on identity, on someone's individuality, because you are requested to, and therefore, well, maybe silently by society, but you feel that you are requested to suppress one or more parts of you, whether it be your voice, your style, how you dress, your ethnicity, your sexual identity, your needs, your necessities, any of those and all of those. Obviously, it's compounded when it just that those keep being added on. But I think it's just unnecessary, and it's unfair. And I'm all about fairness, creating fair spaces for people. And if people feel uncomfortable with labels, so be it. But it's just about fairness. Everybody wants to be treated fairly, have access to the same things in a fair manner. And I guess to me, a little bit like Atif, it is intersectional. And I grew up in the 70s in Rome, in Italy, adopted into a white family. So I think for me, straight away, it was, I think, making myself less other. So I guess the 3 strands for me, without taking too much time. So the sort of the me bit, and then the sort of professional bit. So I think it carried on in my professional life, to gain credibility, to not have that angry black woman label, and also not to penalize or make others not of color, and usually, I'm sorry to say, but male, less uncomfortable. And as a founder, that was even more. I created my own company because I didn't want to operate in those spheres, and I wanted to make sure that people understood how important individuality is, and how important diversity of thought is in the widest possible sense. And you don't, we are all different, full stop. And we all therefore have different ways of thinking about things and organizing data and arranging stuff. But yeah, I just, even in my professional world, up until a certain point, I was like, okay, I need to conform, and I need to fit in, and I need to not sort of rub people up the wrong way because I am in a certain way, or I'm bold about difference, and I'm quite challenging to those who don't see how important difference is, I guess. So I think it's a challenge, for us all. And I think, as the other 2 panelists have said before me, it's something that we all do, and I think the level when it's it just becomes heavier to carry the more you have to do it.
Thanks, Sis. And Roxy, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Alice. Hi, everyone. My name is Roxy. I am marketing manager at Comedia, an independent arts venue here in Brighton. That's where I am. I'm in the dressing room right now. And I'm also the founder of my own small business called Myosotis Film and Photography, which is all about brand storytelling as a force for change. I try and let curiosity lead the way. And I'm always questioning why things are the way they are and how can we be more intentional in how we do things and how we show up. And I think that's very much related to masking. Masking to me is pretending. It's whether it's unconsciously or consciously, whether you're trying to be more and make yourself bigger, or you're trying to be less and make yourself smaller. You're doing it to try to fit in, to not stand out, to protect yourself. For some reason, you feel you can't show up as you are. And that to me is where masking comes in, with all the intersectionality and other caveats previously mentioned by the other panelists. For me personally, it has shown up in school, at sports clubs, at work, in my personal relationships. I didn't really speak up for myself. I kept things to myself until at some point I didn't really realize what my own wants and needs actually were. And if I don't know, then how can I tell someone else? So my identity has always felt quite fragmented. Like I showed up so differently in all these different spaces that it got to a point where I couldn't really figure out who I actually am, like as a whole person. And part of processing my neurodivergence over the last 4 or 5 years, I'd say, has been to kind of bring all these fragmented pieces back together into one person that is just a multifaceted person. So I'm in a much better space now. But yeah, unmasking has been a really, really big part of that journey for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Roxy. Thanks, everyone. Fantastic introductions. I'm even more excited to delve into the conversation now. So the first question, esteemed panelists, is how do narrow views of what is deemed professional impact neurodivergent and multiply marginalized people and drive masking behaviors? I will pop these questions in the chat as well so that people can keep track of them. But Atif, I'd like to come to you first on this question.
Yeah, okay. So I guess I've given this a little bit of thought, and I'm going to be sort of a provocation, really, I suppose, because the word professional is probably the challenge, isn't it? That it's an ambiguous term, and it can mean so much, down to however we've felt it meant wearing a particular set of clothing, a set of behaviors, conducts. And in truth, there was a movement run really positively with good intent by the folks that set up mental health first aid. And it's you're familiar with it. It's called Bring Your Whole Self to Work. But I would ask, all of us panelists and listening, do we all bring ourselves to anything? Like in the sense that I can bring myself to a conversation with Alice because I think Alice is wonderful and I can be really open about it. But would I necessarily speak to Alice the same way I speak to my brother, who I also think is one of brothers that I think are wonderful? No, it'd be weird. She'd probably think, whoa, dude, why are you talking like that? Now, because in truth, we don't have a one self. But what we do have, and I think it's a real misnomer to expect that of people, of ourselves, that there is this one self, and this one self is liberated. I think if I was generous to myself, I'm an interesting bunch of guys, do you know? And one of them's really, really into everything, and one of them's really freaked out by everything. And so those things happen. So it's really question I really would ask is, it's not whether we bring our whole self to work, because I don't think that's true, but do we bring the self that we want to bring without repercussion? Do we bring the self that we want to bring that fits today? Because we're not constant in anything. And I don't think you have to be ADHD to be inconsistent in things. I just think that's to be human, But when you faced workplace workplace traumas. And I think that word is used a lot, and I think it fits. So maybe I'm going to use the word isolation instead because it can be strong for a lot of people. So we use learning isolation, and I certainly did at school. So I had to learn to make eye contact. I used to teach myself to look at people, and I was selectively mute as a kid. But I was in, and Cecilia shared it really beautifully, I thought. But I was also in foster care. So a lot of things for me were about what is it I'm supposed to do? It wasn't about masking. It's almost like saying, because you're not masking if you don't know what you're supposed to do. Does it mean you're just coping? And then you're working out what is that coping? Well, largely it's just existing. It's not necessarily living. And then you learn to live through love and liberation and people. So I guess my question is, and I do this a lot, I ask myself, look, that things are really important that we think about barriers to participation. And often the biggest barrier to participation is sometimes a diagnosis. And so we are quick to talk about that. But actually, what we don't do is say, is a diagnosis safe for this person? Is it even helpful? Do they come from a culture that sees themselves in this? As an Asian man, I never saw anyone talking about neurodiversity that looked like me. I still am fairly much a unicorn on this. Not said that before, but I get to be an Asian person leading a conversation on this around the world on neurodiversity. I'm from a culture that doesn't do that. So where I'm getting at is we mask within a masking process. We as people of color will mask even within neurodiversity conversations because we want to fit in to be the right kind of ADHD voice that Europeans have modeled ADHD on. And we want to fit into the right version of dyslexia, that entrepreneur that Europeans have recently modeled dyslexia on. But in truth, what we've got to do is say, well, those of us who have agency also have solidarity. Let them step forward to help others be sincere. I don't know if that's about masking or unmasking, but it is to be sincere. And the only way we can do that is through something we're affording to all of ourselves. At least I hope we are. And I definitely know that's the intent of this call. And this is safety. And that speaks to the heart of it. So when I look at the narrow views of professionalism, I suppose my one question I'd have is most folks are not white collar workers. They're not on LinkedIn. They're not professionals. They are physical workers. The majority of the country is made up of that. The majority of the world is. So professional, I know is I worked in a bank. I hated it. It hated me more, and and I wore a tie, and I certainly wouldn't roll up my sleeves, let alone show tattoos or anything like that. Now it's totally normal. So that's a really interesting space. But there's something I'm going to hold, and I might just pause for a moment. Is that in truth, if you have to do more in a workplace to be in it, then you're hardwired to share less. Your survival is dependent on you sharing less. It's not dependent on you unmasking. It's dependent on you holding on to what keeps you safe. Now, it's the work of other people to go, I see you. And in time, with love and liberation, we'll see each other more. But it's not just a given. So I suppose the question I've really got is, when we think about these terms and these taxonomies of language, are they truly intersectional in themselves? They're definitely beautiful in their intent. And even conversations around neurodiversity, I think, need to mature into really understanding what intersectionality means. Yeah. But I guess I would say is, yes, masking is happening, and what drives it is insecurity. But that insecurity doesn't come just from being neurotypical per se. It comes from a myriad of factors, poverty, shame being probably the two biggest ones.
Yeah.
As well as choices. So I guess my question then becomes is, and to everybody else is, it's crazy what we're missing, what we're really missing from people when they can participate. And so do we recognize it's not so much they should unmask, but rather what we are missing as a civil society when so many people are playing small? And what do we choose to do about that?
Wonderful.
I hope that wasn't too long an answer.
Thanks, Atif. But one of my favorite things about talking to you is how you always answer my questions with another thought-provoking question. So thank you. I feel like there's about 5 different webinars in everything you said. So I'm hoping everyone is taking that food for thought away. So thank you so much. Cess, we'll come to you next.
No, I think Diana had her hand up before me.
It's fine. Dee's messaged me to say, let's go.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things following what Atif has said. So working in the DEI space, I often have to have conversations with people around it's all very well and good to say bring your true self to work. And I completely agree with Atif that we all have multiple selves. And I think that is the norm. That should be the norm because we know. And also, we should be allowed to be spontaneous enough to and authentic enough to kind of go, actually, with this group of people, I'm this, with that group of people, I'm that, with my brothers, I'm this, etc., etc. But I think for me that the challenge is when the workplaces talk about bringing your true self to work, it comes out as a you must. And so in the conversations that I have with organizations that I work with, I just ask for caution to be mindful that that is an offer. It's not it's not a demand. In order to be inclusive, you must bring your true self to work. Not at all. I think an inclusive, psychologically safe workplace is a place that says, should you wish to, at the time that you wish to, of your choice, and maybe someday yes, someday no, it's fine. Please do, because you will be welcome here, whichever level of sort of bringing your true self to work you want to. And actually, if you bring a different true self to work, it's also fine. But I think we need to be very mindful of it's not a demand, and when it's posed like that, then I think people who are already masking mask even more. So that's the first point. And I don't know if I've got time, but there's a very sort of anecdote that I tend to talk to people about professionalism to talk to sort of highlight that these concepts also sort of erase someone's reality or someone's lived experience. And the example very, very quickly is I was interviewing somebody alongside someone else. The person turns up with 1 minute to spare, and they are a little bit disheveled, and their trousers are rolled up, and their shoes are dirty. And the other person with me, oh, that's totally unprofessional. I would never turn up for an interview like that. Da, 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 da. Anyway, long story short, the person was a single parent carer. It was London. It had been hoofing it down the day before, and they had cycled through puddles. And so that's what we need to be mindful of when we use these big umbrella terms, because they're erasers, really.
Yeah. Super important, Cess. Thank you so much. Dee.
Hello. Yeah, just to add to everything else that's been said, I just kind of wanted to speak to I guess kind of the liminality of masking, because I feel like our identities are really complex and we quite often straddle multiple identities, different facets of ourselves. And I feel this a lot as a multicultural person. So I'm half white, half Mexican. And there's really, when you're mixed, and I'm sure whether you're not, I can only speak to my own experience because I only know being mixed. But as a mixed person, I can never fully unmask because my Mexican side experiences one half of me and sees one side of me. My white family sees another side. When I'm in this culture, like I'm having to filter my brain, which thinks in Spanglish and is just like all this bilingual chatter, into like a way that will be understood. And so there's something about how the facets of ourselves show up in different contexts. The other thing, I think masking is quite often about what we don't say. So for me, masking quite often is just holding back from my context, my history, my story, because I may be like presentable or professional now, but there's a lot of myself that masking for me showed up in not being able to share that. So the fact that I was sectioned multiple times, I was expelled from high school, like these are not the normal things that you're supposed to say. So masking for me is like holding back those parts of myself, my history with drug addiction, my, experience as a stripper, which here, even in this space where I know it is safe, it's like I hold myself back because those aren't the parts of the story that you're meant to share. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about it.
Yeah. Thanks, Dee. Before we move on to the next question, Roxy, did you have anything you wanted to add to this one?
No, not for this one. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so leading really nicely into the second question, and Sess, I'm going to come to you first on this one. What do you see is the long-term impact of masking, both on individuals in business settings and then expanding out to an organizational level?
Thanks, Alice. I'm going to start with the end. So I think I think often you don't realize just how much you've had to mask until you find a space where you can breathe. And that weight suddenly lifts off. And I say this because because coming out of corporate world, I realized, and before I set up my own business, I just realized how much I was carrying and masking and chipping away. But I think in essence, from an individual point of view, if it feels like survival, I think as sort of Atif has also alluded, then it's more than just being tired or fatigued. It's an erosion of, which is why I think initially I sort of said it attacks your identity, because I think it erodes the self, the person, and from an individual point of view, it can have profound effects on your mental and physical well-being. We all know that when there's a lot going on here, our body responds. You're going to get poor sleep. You're going to, potentially have, digestive problems. And I think I'm not neurodivergent myself, but I have lots of friends who are, and obviously we're on a panel talking about this as well. But I am told that there's a real thing that is called autistic burnout, and if you are autistic and neurodivergent, it's something that can last, for months, and sometimes takes years and years to recover from. So it's deeper than. So when people say, "Oh, you're a little bit, you're fatigued," or I can imagine how tired how awful this must be. It's like, let's stop undermining people's experiences when we don't understand them. I think that's because the physical and mental impacts means that it's a loss of your function, of how you can function. You're losing ways in which you can just be, and I think it really fragments you. It chips away, and it makes you sort of into these little pieces of things that can only be in a certain place, but then they can't, and then they're attacked, and then they're eroded. It's a real, and so I think from an individual level, it's more than just surviving, and if I link it to the organizational level, think what that does on someone's performance. Think of what type of talent you could lose, and this is the sort of opposite of what Atif was talking about in terms of what are we missing out on, when we have these norms and conformity that takes you down this narrow route where you can't be anything else other than what you're expected to be or what is considered the norm. Gosh, we lose. It's a complete loss of. It's going to be a drain on organizations in terms of talent. They're going to miss out. You're going to spend so much money on re-advertising, re-recruiting, everything else. But I think essentially, for the people who don't leave, you are going to hinder their journey as an employee. The employee value proposition will be zero to those people, because they will not be surrounded by exciting, buzzing diversity of thought, colleagues who are, really think, left sides to you or diagonally or whatever. So Yeah, I think there's a huge cost to conformity.
Yeah, absolutely. Roxy, I see your comment in the chat about your experience. Would you like to come in next to this one?
Yeah, sure. I've never met Cecilia before, but what you just described about the personal experience of burnout, that's pretty accurate to how I've been feeling. Um, and I think I'm still sort of at the tail end of it, and I have been scared of using the word burnout, because it's also so normal to say, "How are you?" and for the response to be, "Oh, I'm so tired." Like we're all so tired, we're all so busy, but it is more than that because it's exhausting to keep up appearances and to deal with this world that's full of unspoken rules that you don't know because no one's given you this rule book or this inherent like intuitive understanding. So you're trying to figure all of that out while also still just continuing to live your life, to do your job, to keep up appearances. It's more than exhaustion. I think this year has been the first year in my life where I kind of had an experience where I fully understood what was going on because I could take the neurodivergent component into it. So yes, autistic burnout is brutal, Deanna saying in the chat, and it really is. And I guess moving to the organizational level, again, fully agreeing with what Cecilia has already said. But I think there's an added thing I was thinking about in terms of progress. Like we make much better decisions when different viewpoints are taken into account. And I think professionalism leads to, and masking, to just sort of agreeing with everyone, or kind of not necessarily agreeing, but just kind of going along and not expressing your opinion if it's slightly different. But I think debate is crucial for us to make progress. And we're missing out on all of that on an individual level, on a business level, and just like as a society at large, because there are all these people that feel they're not welcome in this professional space because they don't know what professionalism means and how they would fit into that. So they're not even entering that space. They don't have access to that space. And that's a very intersectional issue that has been touched upon by previous people already. I think that's where it actually becomes quite dangerous, this whole idea of masking and well, not masking as a concept maybe, but like professionalism as a concept, I find quite dangerous because it's just so vague and it's leading to a lot of exclusion that we maybe don't even see because we're kind of just taking it for granted that everybody knows what professional is and conforms to that when we don't have to. But hey, we're having a good conversation about it now, so let's make some changes, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Roxy. And I think to add to that, I think every single person has a different definition of what professionalism is. It is so subjective. You know, I've been in organizations where what is expected of us in an unspoken way has been really, really different, which has confused me because what was acceptable in one place wasn't acceptable in another place. So yeah, fantastic, important points. Atif.
Yeah, I just want to, and I will strongly say it's a podcast for another day, but I want to say it because the moment is here, is that alongside I saw the chat on autistic burnout. So these are things that really, and burnout belongs to everybody. It's just compounded when there are other isolations impacting on someone's life. Same with, and I get nervous around too much pathology because, not because it's wrong, but because it's so rarely modeled on people of color. In fact, the Eurocentrism at times can be liberating for a lot of people, but also it is not an invitation as much as it's sometimes an imposition. You know, and by that I don't want to be cryptic on that. I'm saying that we just do not see neurodiversity modeled on people of color or social global realities. And there's a lack of curiosity to that, which I think us as a movement need to own in order to get it better. But parking that for a moment, I want to be serious and then hope it's a strong phenomenon that people are coming to understand. Yes, no one likes to be rejected. You'd be sociopathic if you did. Yeah, I love being turned away. But it's a question of whether it does such harm to us. Now, some people can cope with it better than others. Some people seem to just go, well, okay, it wasn't personal. And sometimes people can see it as such an injury to their heart. It can bring them to their knees. These are things that are, I mean, might be familiar to some of you. I feel like sometimes, I do a presentation, I can feel like I've got 500 people loving this, and one person giving it a 2 star. I'm like, damn, what was that about? And I focus all day on the 2 star, regardless of the 5 stars that came from everywhere else. But that's the journey for me. But I want to ask something here, is that we're watching rejection sensitive dysphoria on heat at the moment for people of color. The country is moving more and more to the right, and so is the world. We're watching people absorb that, internalize that. And so masking even more so is going to happen in the workplace, because suddenly they're unpatriotic. Suddenly they're obsessed with not supporting the country. When these were conversations that we didn't, and of course, this isn't about being anti-flag, it's about the intent being used in that way. But what we don't have is enough colleagues saying, I see you. And then you don't have to be autistic or ADHD to feel that. But I suspect if you're dealing with RSD, you're feeling it a lot. And what we need is a leadership, and this is a podcast for another day, but we need a leadership that can say, I feel that too. I felt very lost seeing the Prime Minister telling us about how many blankets he's got instead of responding to this, telling me how many blankets he's got on St. George's flag. And so we are a bit lost on this, and we can get better at it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Atif. So we'll move on to our next question now, and Roxy, we'll come to you first on this. What would a utopian, unmasked business world be like? And what is it that stops us from being that way right now?
I think for me, it's all about curiosity. This change can only come about if we're curious to learn more about each other. I think we need to question why we follow certain rules, especially the unspoken ones. Like, it's just bullshit. And who benefits from this? Who created them? They are created by specific people for specific people, and also to specifically exclude another group of specific people. We need to question the methods that we use, and let's figure out what actually works for us to reach our goal. Just because we might be in a business striving for the same goal doesn't mean we all have to follow the same path in order to get there, right? Especially for neurodivergent people, there's the spiky profile. There might be things we really struggle with more than average, but there are also things that we are better at and better than average. So let's find a strength-based model. That's what I'm trying to figure out for myself right now as well, and the team that I lead. To make sure that we all lead with the stuff that we're good at, that we're motivated by, that gets us excited, because tapping into that excitement will get you so far, because once we have our eyes set on something that we like, we will absolutely get there, no matter how long it takes. And there's a resilience there that is just not tapped into enough. But I think that we are not there yet, because all of that challenging the status quo takes a lot of hard work. And it's going to lead to change, which people are very resistant to. Not just autistic people, anyone is very resistant to change. And part of that change is changing of power structures, which obviously the people who are in power don't want to engage with, because it's going to change the way that they see themselves and the way they navigate the world. And I think that is the key to why we don't yet have that utopian world. And it's very nice to see all these nodding heads, because I feel like I get really on a soapbox. Like, I get so passionate about these things, but I feel like that is a big part of it. And I'd love to hear what Cecilia has to add to that.
Yeah. And so much of everything you said weaves into all the stuff that Atif was saying. Honestly, I'm finding it so difficult not to go down a million tangents from all the amazing things you've all said. And I feel like we could have a 10-hour webinar. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And before I come to Cess, Atif's just popped in the comments, cultural curiosity is one of the wonderful keys to collective liberation. Without it, it's all PR performance. Absolutely. Cess, do you want to jump in on this one?
Oh, that's much better than mine. I tend to talk about respectful curiosity because I think we're living in a world where, again, asking questions. Oh, that person's different. Let me ask them a question. Let me make them feel comfortable. Let me do this. And it's like that already you're overstepping boundaries if you're not respectful in the way that you're asking questions. But just to come to what Roxy was saying, it is all about power. And it is all about in my eyes, the only thing that can help now is an actual good old-fashioned revolution. Because and enough people kind of going, this is all crap. I'm not going to hate this person just because but it reminds me so much of a talk that I heard just recently at the Brighton Summit. And it is about it's about, in my opinion, it's about challenging the discomfort of those in power because it's going to upset their nice, beautiful little bubble reality, and looking at the data that is given to us, the data, the reality, what's in the tabloids, how it's sold to us, what language is used, because that is all conditioning to make us think or follow, etc. Which is why I think let's definitely go down that we need to all critically think for ourselves. We're all individuals, we're all able to, and we all do so differently, but that contributes. Every single little element of that can contribute. And secondly, what is really being said? I would say I've come to terms with, I'm going to question every single thing that I read in the papers, on the people, even the people say, and absorb it for me. So reposition all that data, reanalyze it, and form my opinion and my view. And I think if everybody rocks that boat of power enough with their views, and the more the merrier, and the more different the better, they're going to feel a little bit of that revolution and kind of go, shit, we can't just keep telling them what to do, how to think, who to love and who to hate. And that for me, and I'm genuinely, it's a fire that has been lit in me, and there ain't no putting it out.
Amazing. Responses in the chat. Yes, revolution. We're in. Let's do it. Dee.
Um, just to reply to what Cecilia was saying there in terms of kind of like forming your own view and forming yourself. And I think because we're in such a polarized world right now, the world really needs people in liminal spaces where we're not jumping from one extreme to another. And I know it's so uncomfortable. I mean, like I look at the US and my family, it's awful there with Trump and what they're doing to the Latin American immigrants. It is horrendous. And yet, if we start to other the Trump supporters and just go, that's like, the Antichrist or some bogeyman, we're not understanding their humanity. So I think there's something about exposing ourselves to the humanity, even in kind of the out groups, because we have this tendency to split people into in groups and out groups, and just really trying to expose ourselves to not be in our bubble. And so it is uncomfortable, but like where it feels safe and where you have the capacity to do so, just to read different perspectives and try and like kind of understand where are they coming from, not to legitimize it, but just to stretch our own empathy and ability to connect with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in an attempt to summarize all of this amazing stuff before we move on to the last question, like it's really feeling like the resounding message is replacing judgment with curiosity everywhere, no matter whether it's cultural, whether it's societal, whether it's relating to neurodiversity, but being curious about the why rather than leaping to judgment of whether we feel something is acceptable or palatable or professional. Wow, thank you everyone. Again, about 100 different tangents. So to end on a positive, proactive note, and Dee, I'll come to you first on this one. What can we do? How do we create these working environments where it is possible and safe to unmask and show these different facets of ourselves? What needs to happen? What can organizations do? What could we do for
Yeah.
ourselves?
Yeah. Well, there's no one simple answer because people are so multifaceted, but I think some of the things that can help kind of change the tide, I think of cultural change in terms of like, if you know, when you go to an aquarium and you see like the sardines all swimming one direction, but then they can change direction. There's always that little fish who's like swimming the wrong way. And cultural change is like that. One fish is swimming that way and then more join him. So what we need is more of those fish to have the faith and to turn and start swimming the other direction. And we particularly need those people who are brave enough to kind of showcase their difference and their vulnerability, because that is what makes it safe for the other fish to start and turn around. Because some of those other fish might not actually want to be heading that direction, but they're just trying to not be eaten by a shark. And so we need, like, it sounds like a buzzword, but we really do need representation. We need visibility. We need vulnerability. We need storytellers. We need people who are in senior roles saying, hey, I used to be a drug addict. Like, hey, like, whatever, I was raised in care, whatever my story is, because these people are already there in organizations. And so I think it's unmasking at those levels so that it's safer for others to bring themselves as a starting point. And I think also just remembering that we can't make a place safe. You can't say this is a safe space, because safety is experienced within the individual, but we can create openings. We can create spaces where people can be brave to bring themselves. So I prefer the term psychological bravery rather than psychological safety. I think that that's probably where I'd leave it for now, because I know I want to hear what everyone else has to say as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I think, I love when we talk about brave spaces as opposed to safe spaces, because like you say, safety is subjective. We can't guarantee it. Um and we've said a lot about different facets of ourselves as well. And I know from my personal experience that I I felt very much in working environments before I worked for myself that there was a safety in me being a certain way, but the cost of me being that way was this like gradual erosion of my capacity to cope, of my resilience, of my energy. And whenever the part of me that couldn't regulate itself like slipped out, I was punished. And it felt like I was punished over and over again for showing humanity, for showing emotion, for admitting that I couldn't cope. And that got worse as I got higher up. As a junior, I felt that my emotions were
Oh,
far more tolerated. But once I found myself in a leadership position, I was expected to be so much more of a robot. And I think that that is a massive, massive problem in organizational settings. Um, any other thoughts from other panelists on that? How we can create those working environments where it feels possible to unmask before we move
Well,
on. Atif, yeah.
yeah, I would just probably get I'll put a link to it, but maybe I'm trying not to plug it too much, but if people are interested in it, I'll put a link to it. But Calling All Minds has an inclusion passport designed not around labels. It's okay to have labels. Labels are deeply liberating for some people. So if you want them, you need them, share them. But there are those who just cannot for different reasons, and we touched on a bit already. But I would really encourage people to look at the social model of inclusion, recognizing social economics. It's about representation, yes, but it's also about agency and those who risk more when they try to exercise it versus those who can. So this is where allyship and solidarity really gets tested, and it's being tested now. But I really would say, if I put a link to it, look at inclusion passports. The idea that I could ping my needs or the barriers that prevent me having agency are just important. To be, maybe Dee doesn't need to know about the things, but she just needs to know he uses a screen reader, and that's enough, or he's okay with non-halal meat. None of that stuff matters really. It's just, can people not be expected to be psychic? Yeah, of course. Can they show they care? Well, yes, of course. Do they know how to? Maybe not. Yeah, and so that's when we use things like inclusion. It's called access, and I'll make sure it's there.
Brilliant. Yeah, please do pop the link in the chat to that, and we'll share it out after when we share the recording as well. Sess.
I just wanted to pick up on another term that again, for another time, another podcast, another whatever, which is leader. And very often when picking up on your point about, when you then become a leader, what is deemed professional, and those two words get put together a lot. And I have a real problem with that, because leaders nowadays, I think, are told not to show, you can't be weak if you're a leader. You can't be, and again, that goes very much to sort of outdated notions of what is a leader, and we still, have this paradigm of it's a male and he's X age and he has these type of behaviors and he never shows weakness and he always tells people what to do. He doesn't ask and he doesn't have empathy. But then that's not a person, that's a robot. And I think, again, the leadership and the professional, those two conversations kind of go hand in hand, and to me, a true leader is a person who shows their humanity, and who doesn't pretend to just not give a shit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. I did have one more question, but I'm also conscious I want to give people a chance to ask a question. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to pop the final question into the chat, which is not what I have just posted in the chat. So the final question was, how can we redefine professionalism to be more inclusive? And I instead, as I say, I'm going to pop this in the chat, and I would love any of you to comment and answer that question, and we'll capture your responses, just as a way of summarizing everything that we've discussed today. So for the last 15 minutes, I'm going to open the floor to questions now. So either feel free to pop a question in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to come off mute and ask a question to our panelists.
Maybe if I could just say it really short answer is, I think the question really is about like professionalism, because it's ambiguous as a term, and I think it is. We're not sure what we mean by it necessarily, but we know what we feel from the word because it has that power over us. Yeah. I guess if we're to sit with that in a quiet place, that would be important.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think we're really not even talking about what's inclusive. I mean, here we are, but here's my challenge. I think we're here to talk far more about participation than we are here to talk about professionalism. That participation is real, it's honored, it comes from a deep sense of yourself. Professionalism is such an ambiguous term. And so we're chasing something that we may not even have a shared understanding of. But participation, we individually get to know it's honoring us, and we're in that brave space to be able to articulate that back. So I think that's I think for me is participation, I suppose. Yeah. And healthy participation. Anyway.
Thank you. No, that's really, really helpful insight. Are there any questions from anyone?
Just while people are
thinking,
sucking up the courage to ask a question. I mean, it's interesting. As this point, because I was going to say contribution.
Oh, apologies. Someone's not on mute. There we go.
I mean, I was going to say contribution. So for me, the utopian scenario, how do we do it? How do we reframe that conversation? And it's where you reward contribution instead of conformity.
Yeah, absolutely. Last call for questions, and it's okay if there's none. We covered a lot today. There's a lot of food for thought and a lot to take away. Lots of comments in the chat. Yes, Dee.
Oh, I mean, I think just to continue riffing on this discussion around professionalism and inclusion, whatever terminology we're using, I find a really helpful question to ask is what would make things easier for you? Because that's really what it's about. Masking is about the effort that you're having to exert to be able to show up in a space. And it's just so simple. What would make it easier for you? And we can't always meet that. But then that covers so many facets of it as well, physical, mental, cultural, all of that. But I think also, we haven't even touched on freaking hybrid working, but just like in terms of professionalism, I have this battle with my my husband's workplace because they demand everyone be in there 2 days a week, and they're told they're very privileged because they have hybrid working. But for any neurodivergent people or any people with physical conditions or caretaking responsibilities or all of that, what is the cost of those 2 days, and how much is it taking out of their ability to show up for the rest of those days? And so I think even just those norms of physically having to be somewhere, it's like, let's question all of the things that are supposedly normal. Let's rip it up and start from nothing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Before I go to Angel, who's got their hand up, I'm just going to address a comment that was asked in the chat just before, which has people have been riffing on. Is like, what do people do now to manage? Do they start their own business? And a lot of people commenting and saying, feeling like the only way to be mentally well is to be self-employed. I'm now working solo with direct clients. And I will open this up to the panel, but I just want to share that I've been having a lot of conversations around this, and like the language of entrepreneurship being about scaling, growing, exiting, six-figure, all of this stuff. And I think this really doesn't take into it's like there are two different camps of self-employment that I see really clearly. There's sort of entrepreneurship almost that's fueled by this sort of ambition, like people feeling that there's a choice to be an entrepreneur and that's who they are. And then there's entrepreneurship by necessity, which I see so many people feeling like they didn't necessarily have these huge ambitions to be self-employed, but have become self-employed out of a necessity because they're feeling like that is the only way that they can be themselves. And I just wanted to share that was exactly my experience 9 years ago. I've been self-employed for 9 years now. And that was the only way that I saw where I could be myself. And it came from a work environment where I'd felt like for a decade of working, I was constantly criticized for my personality, never for the work that I did, but for my personality. And I've never had any criticism like that since going self-employed. I can look after myself so much better. And I found so much of the language around business and success massively alienating, because all I wanted to do was just earn decent money and have a work-life balance and support myself, never grow an empire, never scale, never exit, never make millions, none of that. And I think that is a real gap as well from an inclusion perspective in the language around entrepreneurship and self-employment, that it completely ignores people who are entrepreneurs by necessity. So yeah, bit of a ramble, but before we come to Angel's question, do any of the panel want to just share anything on that?
If I may just say is that, yeah, I mean, I relate. I feel like I created a company that I needed when I was younger, and there's a lovely saying, isn't it? Be the kind of person you needed when you were younger, and it's true.
Yeah.
So, and the world is in a wonderful place because of the diversity of organizations and people who have created things. But I would hold something dear to you all, is that it can be lonely. And so things like Joyfully Different is a really good place to be part of and hold that space really tightly. But secondly as well, it's just to know that if you are using the roadmap of successful entrepreneurs, use it with a pinch of salt, because your motivations may be different to theirs. Your social outcry about what's wrong in the world is your driver, perhaps, unless you want to sustain that. But maybe you don't look at self-worth through spreadsheets. And maybe your journey is to be comfortable with that. So dig deep is what I'm saying. As someone who's done it, it will smash you, but it will also raise you up too.
Amazing. Very quickly, before I go to Angel, who had their hand up, does anyone else want to share anything on that? No? Fab. Angel, yes, please come and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Lovely. It was a question about the inclusion passport. So I work at an organization and we have access riders, and it's just something we have implemented with our clients through onboarding, and that's really great. But with an existing organization that maybe doesn't have that and doesn't already do that, how can you implement an inclusion passport or an access rider? Because I find sometimes in the past when I've worked with bigger organizations, any time that they've sort of introduced an inclusion or an accessibility thing, it is sometimes seen as, oh, this is going to take more time, this is going to take more money. And so how can we sort of implement that in a way that doesn't come across as, well, this is just, time wasting, or, oh, I don't have time for this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's real because a lot of EDI, as we saw the last 20 years of work, got recalled so quickly. So was there a heartfelt fight for this? I think there is for many people, but it never proved itself as a business case. And so when it doesn't prove itself as a business case, it becomes just nice to have in a time of plenty. But in truth, it is a business case. I don't think anybody would really struggle to say that retention and inclusion and good mental health isn't a business case. That mental health loss in this country costs 5% of its GDP. It's £38 billion a year spent in mental health loss. That's a lot of money just for the workplace. So the question then becomes is, what is the cost of healthy participation? And does it really cost? But to do that, it isn't just a return on investment argument, but there is that in the passport. It's there, but it's really actually creating an attitudinal shift, because we've all inherited deficits and disorder narratives. We're all at times reinforcing it inadvertently just to be part of something. So what we haven't done is go into a space of healthy participation to say, look, that we are all neurodiverse, but we're not all marginalized because of it. And that has an impact in our work. It has an impact in our civil society. So the passport has to be there to say, look, you will address barriers through this. You'll get data to understand what you need to do to make accessible recruitment. And you'll have staff that will want to share these differences with you, not because they have to, because of job insecurity, because they can, because they know they're safe when they do it. And that takes a culture shift. And I think that culture shift, I've sort of touched on in the chat, that we are custodians of this, that we may not see it in our lifetime, really. I mean, it's a bit of a thing to buckle up for, but we're up against 400 years of oppression here. So when we do this well, we're going to have to say, on my watch, we did this much, and we made it easier for this generation after us. And I think you are all doing that well and truly here right now. I hope that helps, Angela. But Angel, but have a look at the Access Passport as well. And if you want to reach anybody here, want to reach out to me, say, how do we make this scene better? Will help. It helps us too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dee, I know you want to come in on this, and Sess has got her hand up as well. So Dee, do you want to come and speak to Angel on this?
Yeah, I was, I mean, I guess just kind of more broadly speaking in terms of, accessible resources and stuff. Like you can have the fanciest tool, you can spend like tens of thousands having consultants in and doing a fancy strategy, or you can have a free thing. It doesn't really matter about the size of the thing, but is it a springboard for further change? And so I think all of the panelists here have some amazing resources. So I know that we'll be sending out an email with all of that, and just to also signpost a couple of joyfully different things that may help. So there's the communication compass. So again, this is just another lens. So free communication compass on our website, free neuro-inclusive leaders toolkit, and then also the free 2-week membership to Joyfully Different. So and I encourage everyone here to promote their own stuff as well, because I think there's so many beautiful angles that people can get, help from.
Fabulous. Thanks, Dee. Sess.
Oh, this is when it's going to go all pear-shaped for me, because I'm going to come to Angel's point. And, I think it's always a challenge. And I think, like Atif has alluded to, when DEI has now come under such scrutiny, and I think maybe yes, when everything exploded, when George Floyd was murdered, people started doing DEI, it became this craze. which means that actually sometimes it wasn't done properly and it wasn't done so it was embedded. So some of the criticism is valid, but what I would say to you, for if you're in an organization that says, oh, it takes time, this costs money, and it's like, yes, but this is your business. You know, it's a little bit with that same fire, revolutionary fire. We should be done with not looking at people, which are the greatest asset that a business has, as business critical. It is business critical to look after your people. It is business critical that they can be innovative and creative and bring their true selves should they wish. You know, that is a business critical thing. And my as a metaphor would be, do you want to be the dinosaur that gets hit when the meteor hits? Or do you want to evolve? And that's, yeah.
Thanks, Tess. Roxy, yes.
That was actually the answer that I'd written down for the question about how can we redefine professionalism. It just needs to be about people. Right now, it's about behaviors that only function towards or serve a certain goal towards status or wealth or something that is not people focused. And I think that's the thing that's just most wrong with the concept, besides obviously, like we've said before, it being quite unclear. And I've written down participation and contribution as alternatives that I will absolutely start implementing more regularly when having these conversations. Yeah, I took lots of notes. It's been really fascinating, but I think the people focused thing is what I'm going to try and take away from the most and think over for days, if not weeks to come.
Fantastic. Thanks, Roxy. Hopefully that was helpful, Angel, for you. And what a fantastic note to end on. Like, ultimately, it's about people, it's about individuality, it's about curiosity. So much amazing stuff has come out of today, and I've got about 5 million podcast ideas from everything that has been said. So we will wrap things up now. Firstly, with a huge thank you to our fantastic panelists for being part of this discussion and sharing so thought-provokingly and articulately all of your thoughts on masking and professionalism. Thank you, everyone who has joined us today. We will email everyone afterwards with the recording link, as well as links of where you can get in touch with all of our panelists if you want to follow up with them or chat about working with them. Dee has also popped some links in the chat now where you can find out more about us, about Joyfully Different, our membership for neurodivergent business owners, and some helpful neuroinclusion resources as well. And when we email you as well, we'll also include a link for you to book in a call with Dee if you wanted to find out more about our work with organisations. So thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, guests. It's been fantastic to see so many of you and have this conversation, and have an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks,
Well done all.